Good morning. Good morning. It is Monday, 9 a.m. So it must be Make It Happen Monday. For those that are new to the show, I'm Cheryl Andrews, and this is the show where we support you to achieve success without stress by sharing stories and strategies, but more importantly, asking you questions so that you can listen to and trust yourself. So without any further ado, today's subject is learning and sensory overwhelm. Those who've been watching this series, this is a sixth and it's the final session, it's final episode, put my teeth back in, of the six. So we have covered, in episode 1 we did diary overwhelm. So if you look at your diary and you just feel completely overwhelmed, we looked at emotional overwhelm, when you find yourself emotionally responding, whether you're in tears or angry. We looked at cycles of overwhelm, where we get frustrated, where we sort of just get over one moment of overwhelm and something else triggers overwhelm. We looked at financial overwhelm, fear about money and what that might mean if you've got too much or not enough. And last week we looked at social media, but this week we're looking at learning and sensory overwhelm. And what I want you to think about today is that whenever we're going through change, we are going through a learning process. So if I define learning as you've got to do something new, you're learning about something. So there's going to be some kind of change in your understanding, your perspective, your perception, your skill set, your ability. And so the process of learning is going from not knowing to knowing. And if we are setting out on that journey to learn something because we have to learn it for something, then there'll be a specific thing that we need to know how to do. And there'll be an awareness at the beginning that we don't know how to do it. And then we'll go through a process of taking action, applying something, practicing something until we have learnt the thing that we're going to do. And we can do that consciously, as in we can go on courses, we can go to college, go to university. Good morning, whoever's joining us this morning, please say hello. We can do conscious learning, and we have the unconscious learning. It's, we might be watching our favorite soap and they start talking about an illness we've never heard of, or maybe they start mentioning how somebody feels, and by default, we're learning about other people's life experiences. We could be walking in nature and notice something, unusual and look up the plant, and therefore we'll be learning. So learning can happen in all different guises and all different places. And it's, to some extent, it's a permanent state. And yet, for some people, good morning, Gina, lovely to see you. For some people, learning, or the thought of having to learn something new, can evoke stress, which then affects people's ability to achieve the success they want to do. And Gina, who I know is a very renowned trainer, will know all about creating the environment for learning. And we are processing through our 5 senses. But what's been really interesting for me this week is realizing the impact that we've had with so much online learning over the last 2 years, nearly 3 years now. Went to a conference on Wednesday, drove up to Cheltenham, was there from 9 till 5, drove home, and had gone to my first networking event the week before. I realized that it sounds really strange, but obviously you in your own home, you've got your familiar smells, your familiar taste, maybe your favorite drink, your favorite food, etc. So a lot of your senses may be very much associated with familiar, and therefore when we go back out into the world, it's interesting for me to notice myself having to relearn, because I know I've done it before and I know I have done it and I can do it, but having to actually engage the whole of me. And I was telling a story on Friday when we were running a session about networking for Yous Like What. And I realized a few weeks ago when I went back to my very first networking in a couple of years, that when I stood up, I felt quite exposed. And it was like, suddenly the rest of me could be seen. And it was quite an overwhelming emotional response to the situation. And I hadn't really comprehended the fact that I'd only been able to see sort of from me up to here for the last 2 years. And suddenly, or that's what I was presenting to the world. I have a dress on today, but there have been times over the summer where I've had my professional top and jewelry, makeup and hat on, but had my cycle shorts and trainers below. And suddenly found myself sort of almost questioning and having to check that I was fully dressed and appropriately dressed to be in this networking environment. And the relevance of this is the fact that when we're learning and when we're doing something that's new or unfamiliar, we are processing information through our 5 senses. But the more digital we get, my invitation is to be curious about which senses are we depriving ourselves of. And whereas when we get into a live training environment or a learning environment, or we get out in the world, we get to tantalize and stimulate all those other senses. But here's the thing. Having done this for the last sort of 30 years with people, helping them to get clarity of what they want and the confidence to make it happen, some of us absolutely love learning. And we can actually, in some ways, distract ourselves with learning because we love it. We're just going off and learn something new. And actually, we do that because it's a place of joy and it's a distraction from getting a certain task done that maybe we need to get done to get things moving and action being taken and for progress to be made. And for other people, learning is something they have to do, they know they need to do, but they distract themselves with anything other than having to do the learning. And I want you to be curious for you at the moment. Learning for you is like what? Just thinking about your own relationship with learning. And this week in the Do Delegate or Ditch Academy, we are going through the 8-week foundation course, and I'm doing it alongside the clients. And I was just reflecting on learning for me is like what. And I've realized that when I am calm and I have plenty of time and there's no pressure, I actually really love learning. However, what I hadn't realized until I started reflecting on my own personal journey, and I want to invite you to do the same with this week's show, is if you look at your story about learning, your journey through education, what you immediately were drawn to. Now, when we go into this into a deep dive with clients, we sometimes go look at 6 turning points with learning. But the one that came to me today was remembering that when I was about 7, we moved districts. So I moved schools. So I used to go to Rowner Infants, and now I went to Elson Infants. And the thing that the memory that came back to me, the story that emerged, was that there's this 7-year-old who was more advanced at reading than the class that she'd gone into. And the teacher was telling her off for being a show-off. So actually, by modeling my learning at my best and remembering that story, it kind of like, oh, yeah, when I'm really good at something, I find it really hard. And I've had to, being self-employed and having to promote what I'm good at was part of being the challenge that's actually been associated with networking and marketing, because I hadn't realized at the heart of it, there was still a 7-year-old girl who was thinking, if you're too good at something or you're better than somebody else, you're going to get put down and you're going to get told off for showing off, and which means you're not going to feel like you're part of the group, that you fit in or you belong. And so what I discovered is that I'm an external processor, and I really value and I really light up and I learn better when I'm in a group. But there was still a very young part of me that was not feeling safe in a group. Now, I've worked on that a lot, but even today, 14 years into this personal development journey, I'm like, I'm going to spend a little bit of time this week with that 7-year-old and just find out, what she'd like to have happen, and to make sure that she has now heard and seen and got the feedback that it's okay for her to be smart. It's okay for her to be really quick with reading. It's okay for her to be a little bit more ahead than her colleagues or her co-workers or her pupils, whichever environment we're in. And the reason I'm sharing this with you is because over the years of helping people transform overwhelm into clarity is quite often, whether you're self-employed, you're employed, I know, Gina, you're in the corporate world doing a lot of training, we have to learn. It's part of the process. And either the reason we won't learn well will be because we don't have enough time for it. We don't have time to actually process. We might learn it, but then we don't have time to implement it. We don't action it. So it's almost then the learning feels like it's a waste of time. So it's like, why do I have to do these courses? Because you do the courses and then I don't do anything with the information. So some of it can be a time thing, is that we're being forced to do it, or we're forcing ourselves to do it, and actually we don't take action, we don't implement it. Then it all starts to feel like a waste of time. The other thing is remembering the brain likes change, and it also doesn't like change all at the same time. So if we did no learning, if things were not evolving, things weren't growing, and things were very much the same, the part of the brain that tracks patterns gets bored because there's nothing new to do. And so there's a part that wants things to stay the same, to know you're safe and it's predictable. But if it stays the same and it's safe and it's predictable all of the time, that part of the brain gets bored and unfortunately will generally find problems for you to have. So far better that you be in a creative learning space and having fun learning stuff, and keep that part of your brain occupied and with something to do that's joyful and great, than leave it so bored that it will come up with things to have something to do. So that's one part of the learning. But the thing that I've noticed with clients that I've worked with over the years who need to learn, particularly for their job, or even to help their children in school, etc., is if their own experience of education is their experience of learning, then quite often many of us, for various reasons, whether we've been humiliated when we stood up and we've read and we didn't read very well and we get called off, or we've got corrected for the quality of our handwriting or our spelling, those words that are said to us by maybe a well-intended or perhaps careless parent or teacher, or even a friend. When our brain is forming, when we're very young, they can have quite an impact on us, and they can become part of the solid belief system that we have about ourselves and the experience of learning. And so when I'm working with clients, I've worked with clients who, they need to write emails, or they need to write copy, or they want to write books, which is why I get involved with a lot of the book mentors around the area, helping people to actually break those patterns and cycles, rewrite the stories to say, okay, well, as 7-year-old or a 12-year-old or a 14-year-old, there was this moment, this day when something happened and it frightened your system and made you think it wasn't a good idea to be doing things in that way. But now as an adult, you can create a better understanding of how you learn at your best, and you can create the environment and conditions, and you can talk to yourself in a way that's going to resource you to be able to learn at your best right now. And it's always surprising to me now, and even to my clients, when they suddenly realize that there was this younger version of them that was either learning too quickly, in my case. And today I was just having one of our students, one of the delegates in the academy just put a comment in and said, actually, that she wasn't learning fast enough. Now, I'm okay with that, because one of the things I know for that experience, that 7-year-old who didn't feel like she fitted in and she felt like she was going too fast, etc. And I can now sort of realize that I've been told to slow down with my speaking, etc. I also know that because of that incident, I also went on to do all the training I did about how to create the conditions for everyone to feel safe when they're in a group learning environment. And I believe it's played to that thing, because I knew what it felt like not to feel safe, and it's influenced me in order to create an environment for other people. But what I'm getting from it today for me personally is that I also can reassure myself, my inner self, that younger self, that I have got some fabulous learning environments now for me to be in, where I can be myself, whatever pace I need to talk at or be at, or whether I'm going too slow or too fast for other people, it's okay for me to go at the rhythm that's right for me. So with that in mind, today I want you to think about learning for you is like what? What works about learning for you? What doesn't work about it? And what could work better? Hope you found today's useful. We're going to finish, as always, with our clean setup, because I've now been talking about my journey, some of my clients' journeys, and some stories about learning and 5 senses. And I'm really interested in finding out whether your learning experience has really been improved by being more online, perhaps coming out of the office and being more at work, or has it been impeded? Are you noticing about whether you go back into the workplace or whether you're going back out to do learning? Are you really sort of loving getting back because you've really missed it and you're now noticing some difference? I'd really love to know from you, because I know that talking to a group on Friday, I'm not on my own when I know that going out and doing learning and networking and being face-to-face and in person is a valuable part of the human experience. But it's also proving for some people, and it definitely did for me, I'll say it's past tense now, and now I've gone through, I'm like, yeah, I'm okay now. But it was quite an uncomfortable experience going back to being in the groups again. And it brought up all kinds of emotions. So given that you've been listening to me now for the last 15 minutes or so, just think about, what do you know now about learning overwhelm and sensory overwhelm? And what difference does knowing that make? And given what you know, what would you like to have happen? Take a moment now and write down the outcome, because it's great that you've invested some time on social media listening to me. But again, it's always check with, what's the purpose? Was it a distraction, or was it to learn something new? And what will you do with that information? Just notice whether you've written down what you want or what you don't want. Whether you're talking about something you want more of or something you want less of. I've definitely opting for some more fun learning stuff. So I'm managing my diary so there is time to do stuff for fun, and it's not a rush, because that is when learning for me is more joyful. What about you? And for you to get what you want, how do you need to be? Or you'll be like what? What kind of you is that is going to make that happen? And lastly, for you to be like that and you to get the outcome you want, what kind of resource and support might you need? And as always, often all we need is time to think. Sometimes we need questions to train our attention on what we want and what do we mean by what we say, and to help us map processes out and look for the patterns. And sometimes we need to have another human being there to hold that space for us, because it's uncomfortable sometimes to have these thoughts. So, if I hadn't had the environment where I'm in now, and I think back to, I may have just avoided the conversation with my 7-year-old self, because it brought up quite a lot of emotion and it brought up some feelings that I didn't really understand. And it's really easy when that happens for us not to do the learning about ourselves. And that's when we don't always know. That is where a coach, or particularly a clean language coach, as the work that I do, can help you. So whether it's me or not, that's not the point. Is often to do the learning, we need time. Secondly, we need questions to ask ourselves to train our attention to focus on what we want and what's working and the process, etc. But sometimes that thinking and that questions, it evokes emotions and feelings and sensations that we find hard to process. And if it is a younger version of ourselves, then having another human being there holding that space can be all that we need to know that we're not on our own, that we've got this, and that we can go through this process in order to change the impact that the past has on our present, and particularly on what we can do with our future. Hope you found today's episode useful. It is the last in a series of 6. I'm now going to take 2 weeks off, and I'll be back with another block of 6 series starting back on the first week in November. And we'll be talking about stress, and we'll be talking about how it impacts us mentally, physically, and financially if we don't actually know how to achieve success without that kind of stress. It's been fab being with you today. I look forward to seeing you all again in 2 weeks' time. Have a great week. And it would seem I didn't manage to actually put the video up, so I'm going to try again.